Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and the Vocal Point now. He was an Edmonton paperboy. What does losing our Bank of Canada governor now mean? Plus, how accurate are the latest tuition forecasts? And Alberta's U-turn at the BC border. How likely are pipelines east? The Monday Money panel brings in Russ Dratwa tonight, investment advisor with Canaccord Wealth Management. Shafik Hirani is a director with Investors Group Calgary, and Beth Hamilton-Keene is a director and portfolio manager at Mawer Investment Management in Calgary. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. Russ, Carney kept interest rates at historic lows, Mark Carney. The jockeying, though, just beginning for his successor at the Bank of Canada. He's leaving for the Bank of England. What impact could a change at the top of our central bank have for Canadians?
Did you also know he was a goalie?
So
obviously brilliant. I played goal as well.
Grew up in the heartland of hockey.
Absolutely. But just like a goalie, they have a tendency to get too much credit when things go well, and they get too much of the blame when things go bad. Most of the people I talked to today, it's decision by committee. They don't see a lot happening for Canada, but it's certainly huge for Britain's fiscal policy and the European community. Definitely a step up is what I'm being told.
Shafik, how did Carney change the role of the Bank of Canada governor in our country during his tenure?
You know, he was actually no stranger to England. He graduated from Harvard itself, so he lived out there, and then he came out here and became a Bank of Canada governor. He was really a surprise appointment when he got appointed. He actually replaced a guy named David Dodge, who used to be the minister, and what Carney did is he brought a level of transparency that David Dodge or the previous administration didn't really have. So he opened up the clarity towards the media, the clarity towards communications. That was a big change for the Bank of Canada, and actually allowed Canada to be one of the most fiscally solvent countries in the world. So he's done a lot for Canada.
Very vocal as well in his role, regular speeches, talking to Canadians about fiscal policy. Beth, Carney also heads up the G20's Financial Stability Board. Does he have a chance to bring Europe out of recession and address some of that continent's debt issues in his new role at the Bank of England?
I'm sorry, can one man do all of that? I'm not sure. However, I do believe that he certainly has the CV to step forward, and he really does bring forward fiscal reform and financial reform, and really does speak to that banking and regulatory reform that's required. And I believe that he is certainly one of those individuals that can kind of bring the thinking around and perhaps make some of those more challenging and difficult decisions that they'll be facing going forward.
The other big story today, aside from Mark Carney, BC's political roadblocks to new Alberta bitumen pipelines, well known. They've got our province looking east. The last few business days, we've seen partnerships appearing to emerge between Alberta and Quebec. Shafik, how likely is a partnership, do you think, between our province and some other eastern areas? Yeah,
you know, I know that they just had meetings in Halifax just last week, and I know Redford and the Quebec Premier had a 30-minute dinner meeting, and they discussed moving some of the pipeline east because of some of the challenges Alberta's had with Christy Clark's demands for an increased revenue source from the Alberta oil sands. The challenge is this mutual relationship is just the beginning of a dialogue, and I think if it is likely, and people have been talking about moving oil east for years, and so it looks like there's a step in the right direction. It's just the timing could be a little bit down the road.
Because the East imports so much, and not from Canada, from foreign sources. Russ, the big issue for Alberta, we need to sell it to somebody. So if it's not going to Asia through the West Coast, will Eastern pipelines meet Alberta's export needs for its oil sands industry?
You opened up a can of worms today. My phone was ringing off the hook with responses back on this. I got any place from we're going to hit capacity by 2014, 2016, 2018 with current measures. So obviously it's going to help. Otherwise it goes into storage, or worse yet, that they're going to shut down these wells like they did in the natural gas sector with so many wells being shut in.
So you can't build a pipeline east that fast.
Exactly. So there's the ones that I heard about here, so I'm sorry to refer to notes, but there were so many. I mean, Enbridge announced plans to expand its mainline system, but also TransCanada's proposed conversion of part of its natural gas mainline to oil. Because when you have West Texas at $88 and Brent is at $111, and as you said, these eastern provinces are paying Brent prices, that's 26% profits that are being missed.
So what does this whole new idea mean for these companies' outlooks, good or bad?
It's good. I mean, otherwise the stuff goes into storage or they shut in these wells. I mean, and
Looking
it's just,
at solutions.
It's another bullet in the chamber to negotiate with BC and the pending whomever is going to take power there as a provincial government.
Beth, is it a good fit for not only a national energy security side of things? That's a really nice side benefit, perhaps. But is this really more about Alberta sort of, you know, a power move saying to BC, look, if you don't want to do business, we'll find someone else?
I'm not so sure that it's a power move, but certainly looking for alternative markets, and certainly the domestic ones, should be easier. And so certainly that would be a good investment or a good exploration. I think it's incumbent upon these organizations and our Premier to continue to explore those options, to keep it diversified, to keep the options open, because there is that looming demand that we're going to need to be able to deliver to, because the demand from what we've got right now isn't going to be enough to use up our capacity.
Next up, did Black Friday help or hurt us on this side of the border? And are tuition forecasts accurate or overblown? What will a baby born now pay for post-secondary? Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and the Monday Money Panel. A shocking new tuition forecast. Oh, might be shocking for parents. Guess how much a degree is expected to cost in 20 years? We're about to tell you, but quickly first, retail sales were what was up on Black Friday. Now it's Cyber Monday. Beth, some analysts estimate $5 billion left our economy on this side of the border Friday. Do our Canadian retailers need to do a better job of following suit?
Well, the $5 billion, I certainly question. It's really hard to know, I think, so early on how much left and how much Canadians were actually shopping for. However, certainly I think that the threat is there, that the Canadians and the look, we can all shop by the internet now, and certainly there's a lot more of that going on, and I think that's the real threat. So in terms of following suit, I think there's two cultures to follow. One is the internet shopping, and certainly the Cyber Monday, as we're participating in today, and be curious to know how many around the office have actually participated in that. And then the other aspect is the culture of going out in the middle of the night to line up to go into a store. I'm not so sure Canadians are ready to go that far yet.
And we don't have the day off like Americans did for their Thanksgiving holiday on the Friday. Is the U.S. shopping frenzy, Black Friday, becoming a real issue for Canada? Will it? The retail sector, Russ, is it a good fit for our retailers? I mean, especially in Calgary and Edmonton, where you've got more square foot retail space per capita than anywhere else in the country, and now you're going to be giving things away at 40% off?
I walked through a major retailer on Black Friday, and they were open at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there was no signage on the days prior. I had no heads up, and I actually saw the people say, "What are you doing here?" She goes, "Well, it's Black Friday." There was no customers, so the marketing of it was horrendous. But if it's going to go any place, I guess our cousins to the south, where 70% of their economy is driven by the consumer, I mean, they need it as much as anybody because they're our major buyer.
And so much less so here in terms of economic driver? The retail sector, it's more manufacturing resources?
Yeah, I certainly don't see it to the degree that the Americans do. We're not as consumer-driven as they are.
Shop till you drop. Shafik, is Black Friday a good or bad thing, do you think, for individuals? Because on one hand, you get a break on things that your family might need, and yet on the other, we were just talking about Mark Carney, we've got this huge household debt that he's been hammering away from for a year or so now.
Yeah, you know, Jennifer, I think for consumers, it's not necessarily a good thing. If you look at the economy, it might be a good thing for the U.S. to basically steal a little bit of our retail sales. But for the average consumer, you know, just like Mark Carney's been saying, the average consumer is a little bit over their, up to their chokehold in debt on average. And to go and spend a little bit more is hurting the average consumer. So it is a win for the economy in whole, because it'll, like Russ said, it'll enhance consumption, which is a big part of GDP. But it's a bad for the average retail or the average consumer.
A Bank of Montreal report reveals new Alberta parents are worried about tuition, not now, but in 2 decades. And with good reason. The new estimate, $140,000 for a 4-year degree for babies being born this year. Russ, is that realistic? Sounds like an awful lot of money.
Let's pull it into perspective. That's future value 20 years. If you come back 20 years, put 2% inflation there, that's $94,000 in today's dollars. So divide that by 4. With my clients, I've been in the business 25 years. That sounds high, but I was talking with a few people on Facebook, and a book is $300, and then every year it's a new edition. It probably has an apostrophe in a different place, one lady said to me. So the costs are up there if you go to the extremes, but $94,000 for 4 years, that does sound a bit high, does it not?
$94,000 sounds high. The BMO report of $140,000 for 4-year, really high. I mean, people need to think about, how am I going to wrap my head around paying that? How am I actually going to pay it? Shafik, are RESPs doing a good enough job? Are they cutting it? Will they cut it?
You know, they help, certainly. I mean, if you look at the RESP benefits, you can put $2,500, and the government has increased the amount you can throw into an RESP to $2,500, and they match you with what's called a Canada Education Savings Grant of 20% on every dollar you put in.
Free money.
So if they're free money, 20% for free, not including growth. So it is actually a good thing. Will it supplement the entire cost of the tuition? No, it'll run short. I mean, Beth and I were just doing the math earlier. $2,500 plus the $500 bonus is $3,000 a year. For 18 years, that's $42,000. So assuming no growth, that's still.
Beth, you probably. Sorry, my apologies. I'm just thinking, you're doing the math. You're probably looking at needing to put in a couple of $100 a month when the child is born. Is that about right, Beth? Are there other options as well?
Certainly, if you want to anchor on that number, and I think, certainly earlier in the conversation, perhaps that number might be a little bit high. I made the crack on the way in. I guess if you're planning to send your child to Harvard, that might be reasonable. The other thing that's really, I think, important to think about is we will adjust as well. So the discipline of saving and the RESP that brings us that discipline of saving, and the matching and so forth that encourages us to save for our children's university. Will we get to the point that we'll actually afford to be able to pay for 100%? Perhaps they'll go later in life. Perhaps education costs won't increase at the same rate and pace that we're predicting right now because technology is changing. Perhaps university in itself will not be the same kind of bricks and mortar scenario that we all envision and know today. So I think that there's many other changes, and certainly the purpose of saving is very important. The amount, save as much as you can, but I wouldn't go to sleep worrying at night that you may not be able to afford it in 20 years.
We just have 1 minute left, but I want to quickly ask all of you what else you're watching today. Russ?
The next 10 weeks is going to be very interesting with the U.S. fiscal cliff to see what's going to transpire there. When they didn't handle their debt ceiling very well, the markets dropped about 17% last year, so we'll have to see.
Governments run out of money.
And yet the corporations are at their best since the 50s.
Shafik?
The main focus has been on Mark Carney today and what's going on with him, but I think as a Canadian, I'm going to want to know who's replacing him, and I think there's going to be a lot of dialogue about the front runners, the Deputy Finance Minister, Tiff McLaren, and we'll see if he is the actual front runner in the next week or two to follow.
And interesting to note, too, the person appointed to that will be appointed by a Tory finance minister, we can pretty much assume. So hopefully stay the course. But Beth, what else are you looking at?
Certainly happy to see that there's an increase in the tax-free savings account room for next year. Starting in 2013, we can each contribute $5,500 per year going forward in the tax-free savings account room. And the other interesting note, good to reflect, inflation last year over year was 1.3%. So when you're rounding up and calling it 2 and 3, inflation was kept under wraps.
Thank you all for your time tonight. Russ Dratwa is an investment advisor with Canaccord Wealth Management. Shafik Hirani is a director with Investors Group Calgary. And Beth Hamilton-Keene, a director and portfolio manager with Mawer Investment Management in Calgary.